Well, hey there, everyone, and welcome to the No Grow Go podcast. I'm Matt Jordan. I'm the senior pastor here at First Methodist Church Enterprise, and I'm so glad that you've joined with us today. One thing that I want to say is just thank you so much for continuing to support the podcast and listen to it. A lot of our views have been up since having Abby on and Jason Smith and over the Christmas season, and so thank you for engaging with us and sharing this message and just continuing to support all the ministries of our church. I do want to share with you today something that I think is so important, and it is something around the word evangelism. And evangelism is a word that is impactful. It's a word that I think draws a lot of passion from church leaders and ministry leaders all across the world. And evangelism is something that many of us look at, and we hear that word, and there are people that want that word on everything the church does and every capacity of church life. How are we doing evangelism? How are we doing evangelism? What evangelism strategies are changing? Evangelism. But evangelism is something that we really need to understand. And so what I'm doing now on Wednesday nights, we just started this past week, is evangelism in the digital age. And so unpacking how we can partake in the practice of evangelism in a world that really is run by our cell phones and by our social media feeds and technology around the world. How can we continue to evangelize in those ways? And I kind of just want to give you a brief overview of really what that looks like for our class, and hope that you may join us on Wednesday nights. But we are really breaking down how to put in some evangelism strategies into our daily social media life. And when you think about evangelism, it is something that's important to understand, that evangelism is, as one person said, one beggar sharing with another beggar where they found the bread, right? That is the most simplistic definition. One that may be a little more complex that I framed for our group on Wednesday night is living intentionally with the expectation, right? Living intentionally with the expectation to engage in conversations, events, and activities for people to share the gospel of Jesus, right? Of living that intentional life, being able to engage in conversation, acts, and events with other people for the sake of sharing the gospel. And I think that's a really clear, important way to understand evangelism. Because when we are living with the intentionality to engage people with the gospel of Jesus, it should change how we understand evangelism, right? Evangelism isn't something that just happens. You don't just happen to evangelize. When you evangelize or proclaim the good news and share the gospel, there's intentionality in it, and when you do so. And no matter, all the research will tell you that the number one way that people are more comfortable coming to church, and that they're more comfortable being able to hear about the person of Jesus Christ and about our faith, is one-to-one conversations. Being able to have a conversation with someone, whether it be over coffee or in a parking lot or at your home or whatever it may be, having that one-on-one conversation with someone is still the greatest way to invite them to church and to share your faith personally. And when you think about that, again, that doesn't just happen, right? That's intentional. Just think about how many people that you work with or that you're in community with, whether it be at your kids' ball practice or ballet practice, or whether it be at your local gym or whatever it may be. How many times have you engaged them in a conversation to say, what do you think about Jesus? Or how is it with your soul? Or, hey, I would love for you to come to church this Sunday. We've got a special service lined up for baptism. It's really something cool to see. Or it's Communion Sunday. It's always a special day. I really would love for you to sit with me at service. How many times do we have those relationships where we have intentionally engaged in those conversations? And even better, how many times have you been in those conversations with your peers, whether they be coworkers or friends or what have you, and they've intentionally engaged you in those conversations, right? Those things don't just happen. It's intentional in the way we do it. It's the same capacity when you think about missions and you think about events in the church and those capacities. There are events and missions that happen where evangelism is not the main goal, where oftentimes the goal is, if you're going on a mission to build wells for those in poverty and have no water supply, you're going to build wells and you're praying for the opportunity to share the gospel with somebody, obviously. And there may be a time where you have that chance. For example, for me, I went to Romania in college, and it was kind of put together a little bit last minute. And they told us, they said, hey, you need to have some sermons in your back pocket. Y'all gonna be doing a lot of preaching. And when we got there, I asked the missionaries, I said, hey, what do you want us to preach on? And they said, we want y'all to share the gospel, because being Americans coming in, you're going to have the opportunity to be in the homes of people whom we've not yet to reach. They have never been able to travel. They've never left Bucharest or the village that they're in, and they would love to meet an American and hear, and we want you to share the gospel. And so our trip quickly became strictly for the purpose of sharing the good news and connecting them with the local pastor there in Romania. So there are missions in that capacity. There are other missions where you're just going to feed people and praying for those opportunities. I know someone who once lived here in Enterprise who just spent some time in England with the intentionality to engage in conversation about Jesus and faith and share the gospel with people. So again, even when you go on mission, there is intentionality that has to be brought to the forefront for evangelism, right? Those things don't just occur. They don't just happen. You have that intentionality. And in other parts of the world, it's more complex, right? In places like China or places like parts of Vietnam or North Korea, places where Christianity is not welcomed or not allowed or not legal or whatever it may be, where there's persecution of the church, you have to be even more intentional, and it's a complex situation of how you can do that in large scale, right? And so it's a lot of one-on-one conversations of intentionality about Jesus and sharing the gospel. It is living in that intentional life, engaging people with the gospel of Jesus. And so how do we do that in the modern world where 5.4 billion people, according to some research I found, 5.4 billion people spend 2.5 hours a day on social media? Or even better, when you consider through podcasts like this, where in 2025, over 600 million Americans listen to a podcast throughout 2025. 600 million people, right? When you think about going where the people are to share the gospel, we have to be looking at how we can do a better job of sharing the gospel digitally and how we can make that connection. And you may say, well, Matt, isn't it important to have that one-on-one conversation, and isn't it important to connect with people in person and those sorts of things? And it absolutely is. But let me share this with you. The new front door of the church, Kerry Newhoff and others have said this, and I've experienced this. The new front door of the church is the online presence of the church, whether it be the live stream, the website, the social media, what have you. That is the front door of the church. And I can tell you, we've had some folks that have joined our church who, when I engaged them in conversation, said, we've been visiting your church for a few weeks online before we came in person. And others who have come, and one lady, bless her heart, she came in and she said, I'm just so glad y'all's website was up to date. I checked your website for the service times and things before I came, and your service started at the time that it said it did. So people look at the online presence of the church before they even come to worship in person. And post-COVID, even more so, 53%, according to Barna Research, was post-COVID, 53% of practicing and committed Christians attend church online instead of in person. Now, you may say, well, Matt, it needs to be back in person. Everybody needs to be in the congregation, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, okay? I am as country born and raised as can be, and I think being in the church is the best place to be. But we have to understand where we're at in the world. This is one of the greatest communication and technological shifts in history. And the church needs to be engaging intentionally for sharing the gospel of Jesus in a way where we're meeting people where they're at and connecting with them in the modern world. And even more so, this is a stat that should really concern you. Remember, 5.4 billion people, 2/3 of the world's population are on social media 2.5 hours a day on average. Most churches, 28 to 30% of churches, the minority of churches, 28 to 30% use the digital platform. 28 to 30% use the digital platform for ministry, evangelism, whatever it may be, right? 28 to 30%, while 2/3 of the world are out in the social media world in the digital age. When you think back, even just in our Methodist history, right? Wesley was preaching in the churches, and his contemporary George Whitefield was out in the fields. And Wesley decided to go out in the fields to preach, and was able to preach to the masses of where the people were, those that weren't able to come to church, or those that weren't comfortable coming to church, or whatever it may be, or that could not come at that appointed time, or couldn't wear the dress to go, or whatever it may be, right? He goes out in the field, meets the people where they're at, and preaches the message there, and the rest is history. So when we think about evangelism, the message that we share has not changed. The message of the gospel of Jesus Christ is the same, just as it was in the first century church, and just as it was even in the Old Testament of this coming of a Messiah. But where we take that message changes, because we have to go where the people are. We have to go where they're at, and where they're at is digital. And so we have to find ways to be creative, both in-person evangelism, whether it be one-on-one, or events and crusades, or those sorts of things. If you remember back in the day with the Billy Graham crusades and those things, and digitally, there's a balance to where the church can sit in both. And even in our church with our live stream services, we're able to make an impact with our worship service on our families who travel out of necessity, or those that travel because their kids are involved in sports or whatever it may be, and they're able to watch our worship service and still be a part of the church. And for our shut-ins and those who are at home, so even on the side of pastoral care. And so we should think the same capacity about evangelism, of the way that we're able to intentionally engage people with the conversation about Jesus and share the gospel with them in that capacity, and how we do it digitally. So that's what we're unpacking on Wednesdays. And some of the things you need to think about if you're coming to that class, or if you're just thinking, my goodness, well, how can I share? Maybe you don't go to our church, you listen, and well, how can I share the gospel online? Right. Well, there are some clear ways, right? You can utilize your Facebook and ask people, hey, if you have questions about Jesus, let me know, right? Just throw it out there. You can use text message groups and those sorts of things like WhatsApp and others to create threads with other people. You can engage by sharing things that are intentional about the faith and about gospel in Jesus Christ, and share those things. There are so many things that you can do in how you unpack evangelism by engaging people on your feed and making that kind of an intentional space to present the gospel. And making that an intentional space is so important. I grew up in as a millennial, right? And I didn't have MySpace. My parents wouldn't let me have it. Matter of fact, I'll be honest with you, I don't even think I knew what it was. I grew up cutting grass and working on farms. I didn't have Facebook till I was a senior in high school. And matter of fact, I was on my way back from an FCA camp, and a girl that was on the bus said, "You don't have a Facebook?" I said, "No, I don't have a Facebook." And they made a Facebook page for me, and my very first profile picture was George Foreman that someone put on there, because I was bald headed. I shaved my head and was a little bigger than I am now, and a buddy of mine thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And so I know what it's like in the early days of Facebook, right? And people would, if you ever look back on your memories and you see past posts and you're like, why in the world did I post that? Right? Why in the world did I share that? Or why in the world, did I put this out there? And I bring that up because oftentimes we just look at our social media as a way to kind of show the world our life, to show about our kids, or to show about the things that we do and where we go and the food that we eat. And it's a beautiful way to do that. But we can make that intentional, right? We can make that an intentional space to where we share the gospel by the content that we put on our own personal feeds, by the things that we post, the things that we share, the things that we like and engage in. Those can be capacities in which we're intentional in how we use it. And I know social media oftentimes gets a bad rap, as it should, right? It has a lot of complexities to it that are not safe, a lot of complexities to it that are dangerous, and some of you may have had your identity stolen and all these sorts of things, right? I've heard all the horror stories. I've had some of them happen to me. But we have to be intentional of the space in which we share the good news in those ways, and in ways that we can utilize that space and in a way make it holy, right? To flood our feeds with the message of Jesus, and to share the gospel in those capacities creatively in a lot of different ways. And so I bring that up to say evangelism is important, right? Evangelism is important, and nothing beats the one-on-one conversation with other people. But in our world today, the world is on social media. The world has gone digital. And the church has an audience to where we can present the gospel on a platform where 5.4 billion people use it for 2.5 hours a day on average. 5.4 billion people. That churches across the world and Christians across the world have the chance to influence if we intentionally use our space for evangelism. And I just want to say this. 31% of Christians, in some of the research I have found, believe it is their personal responsibility to share their faith. Only 31% believe that's their personal responsibility. Now, I don't know what the rest think. I've heard conversations before where that's the staff's job or that's the pastor's job or that's anybody's job but mine. But that is the call on every believer in Jesus to share the gospel, to share the good news of Jesus to the ends of the earth. The message and the intentionality of that message has not changed, friends. But we have to be intentional of where we take that message. Because in our world, a lot of the things that we've done in the past, whether it be door-to-door evangelism or street corner evangelism and those sorts of things, a lot of times it puts in place a defensive mechanism to those that we're trying to reach, right? They aren't willing to engage in conversation, or there's opportunities where you go to preach and to share that good news, and it kind of has the adverse effect, right? You go to share the gospel and instead we're criticized or we're called bigots or whatever it may be. And no matter what happens, right, there's going to be those comments, and the world's changing in that capacity. But we have to look and say, well, where else can we take this message and be creative of how we encourage people with the message of Jesus and share the good news of Christ, intentionally engaging with others? And I think we're missing a huge mission field, if you will, if we forget that the world is digital, right? And that's the space where we can really make a great impact in how we share the message of Jesus through social media, through YouTube, through music, through the digital platforms that we have before us. So my encouragement to you, if you're a member of our church, come on Wednesday nights. The only thing you've missed the intro, kind of what we talked about just now. And we're going to be digging in over the next few weeks of how we can evangelize in the digital age and why we should. If you're not, then I encourage you to think creatively, right? One great resource you can look at, it's a guy named Brady Shear, and he has a page called Pro Church Tools. He's great in a lot of the things that he suggests. Some of those things are a little out there, it's a little more contemporary, but as far as engaging in the world as a church in communication, he's a great resource. And you can find a lot of others out there that do it well. And just get creative, right? How you can use your platform, and everyone has one, right? If you've got social media or you've got a smartphone, right, you've got a platform. And so be creative of how you can be intentional and how you use it to share the message of Jesus, engaging people in those conversations. Because it doesn't just happen, right? It's intentional in the way that we do it. By living intentionally, engaging people through acts, events, and conversations for the gospel of Jesus. Friends, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Look forward to seeing you on Wednesday night. And I hope you have a great week. Amen.